1812 was a very complicated and, well, heated contest between the United States and Great Britain. In this 4 to 6 part segment, we will talk about some of the causes, some of the great battles, heroes, villains, and just some of the people of the War of 1812 that really caused the United States and Great Britain to change as we know it in the early 19th century.
Another reason the War of 1812 was fought was due to the Embargo Acts. The Embargo Acts, which really quite simply meant that the United States would no longer trade with any party at war during the Napoleonic Wars over there in Europe. What was going on is that the embargo was imposed in response to just violations of the U.S. neutrality. We were neutral to the Napoleonic Wars at this point, in which we were going in there, and whenever we'd go over there, pretty much our cargo was seized as contraband, just anything illegal by the European navies. The British Navy, though, was the one that really made all of the very terrifying and egregious acts towards the United States, and which one of which resorted to impressment, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. But it literally, this just got down to the point where instead of the United States declaring war at this point in 1807, when all of this was going on, President Thomas Jefferson acted with a lot of restraint. He actually listened to all these parties concerned. He listened to public retaliation. He listened to everything he possibly could until he recommended that Congress would actually respond with a commercial warfare rather than the military force. The Embargo Act was signed on December 22nd of 1807. Now, the anticipated effect of this measure was not nearly anywhere close to what they wanted. The anticipated effect was to pretty much cause France and Great Britain to cease fighting due to the fact that they couldn't get any of their goods. However, it turned out to be a pretty dumb move. It was impractical. It was a coercive measure. It was both a failure diplomatically and economically. Our military failed. Not our military. Our economy failed miserably, and also diplomatically, it just really ticked our European friends off. So it really made things a lot worse. In fact, as we look into it, they just found more loopholes to get around it, and they really the Embargo Acts were repealed on March 1st of 1809 in the last days of Jefferson's presidency. Really what happened, to put it in a very short and narrow conversation, we couldn't even execute our own laws. Our voters, our citizens were just ticked off, and it needed to end. And this was one of the reasons that when going to the War of 1812 we need to discuss.
When we look at more of the causes of the War of 1812, we always think of impressment and all that. We're going to be covering everything soon. But the one we always seem to overlook is when, well, the Native Americans who have been here for hundreds of years beforehand, they didn't want us here anymore. They sided with the British. What happened was Native Americans were, raiding small villages in the Northwest Territory, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. Well, this kept going on. William Henry Harrison just decided that enough was enough. He gathered up a small army, and in 1811 he met up against the forces of Tecumseh and his allies in a very famous battle called the Battle of Tippecanoe. Now, really, we look at it as an American victory. However, it was really a draw. The Native Americans did withdraw from the field. The Americans took the field. But the thing that really outraged the Native Americans was the burning of Prophetstown right after the battle. The Native Americans just were infuriated by this, and later on you'll find out that this is the main reason why Tecumseh chose to join up with Isaac Brock right at the beginning of the war.
Now, whenever on tour, I always ask people, as a joke, I'm telling them, hey, when did the War of 1812 begin? And of course, people will say 1812, but then I always have people that joke around and say 1811. Well, this right here could be an argument to when the War of 1812 really began. You see, if you lived in the Northwest Territory, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, back during the early 1800s, you were living under constant threat of an attack by Native American warriors. And Tenskwatawa, he was a prophet. He was known as the prophet, and he'd been leading a religious movement among a lot of the tribes in the north, really telling them to get back to their roots. And his brother, of course, happened to be Tecumseh, was really frustrated with the ways of the whites, and he really emerged as that general, that leader that they needed, and he really just awakened a fire that just previous leaders had started before. Now, at this point, really, is all that's going on. They're still not ready to go face to face with the United States just yet. His biggest problem with Tecumseh was still getting all these tribes to unify, to get ready for the upcoming struggle. And Tecumseh went everywhere, really just asking warriors to abandon their loyalty to their chiefs and join just a movement at their capital, Tecumseh's hometown of Prophetstown. Now, he used the argument that the Fort Wayne Treaty, which pretty much just it was land-grabbing treaties, it was illegitimate, that it didn't mean anything to him. And so within 1810, when he met with William Henry Harrison, the general, he demanded that Harrison actually get rid of that treaty, and that settlers should not settle there or else they'll be apt to get attacked. Of course, Harrison said, no way in heck am I going to do that. So really, everything just went downhill from there. Tecumseh warned that he would actually, if it came down to it, that he will ally with the British if the hostilities broke out between those two countries. And since those two countries had been at each other's throats at that point for months, it was looking quite obvious of what was about to happen. Now, in August of 1811, once again, Harrison met with Tecumseh at a last-ditch effort, Tecumseh just assured Harrison, just kept assuring him over and over again that they meant to remain at peace with the United States. However, after he did that, he went south to recruit allies with what they call the 5 civilized tribes. And, of course, most of them rejected his appeals, but a few of the Creeks actually came up and joined him. And, they helped him out during the War of 1812. This all leading up to the battle, which William Henry Harrison really had to gather up a lot of men. And while he was gathering, Native Americans would ambush him, a lot. And so finally, on November 7th of 1811, Tenskwatawa's followers, waving a white flag, met Harrison's forces, and and one of the messengers actually carried Tenskwatawa's message saying that they request a ceasefire until the next day, when the two sides could actually have a meeting, a peaceful meeting with each other. Of course, Harrison agreed to it. It was a gentlemanly way of doing things. However, Tenskwatawa knew that negotiations would not work. Harrison prepared his army for battle on the heights along the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers, and he camped his men in formation, which was very unusual at the time, and kept guard at night. He knew something was about to happen, and it was just getting interesting. The next day, the battle happened. The battle lasted about 2 or 3 hours. The Native Americans, of course, they really tried to attack the ends the formation to gather up men so they could form in and attack the center. However, it didn't work. The battle lasted 2 hours, like I said, and 37 were killed in action, and 25 were mortally wounded, and about 126 were just hurt. But man, 30% of the Yellow Jackets were killed. And the number of Native American casualties, we're not sure, but it's certainly lower than the United States. However, it was considered an American victory. And really, this was part of it. After that, this just led more and more into the War of 1812, and in fact, it led to Tecumseh joining the British later on. All right, now with the Embargo Acts going on, really, the British Navy went into a process in which they've been using for hundreds of years, one of which called impressment. From the mid-1600s all the way up into the 1800s, the British used this as a force to get a larger force without notice of the country that they're using it against. It was criticized by British and British enemy alike. Even the British argued that it was against their constitution, against their rules of doing things. So really what happened, to make a really long story a really short story, impressment ended in 1812 after the United States declared war. Literally 5 days after the declaration of war, Great Britain outlawed the act of impressment, which pretty much meant that the British sailors would go onto American ships, force the American sailors into the British force, so they could have more men to fight Napoleon. That was the whole purpose of it. Well, like I said, it ended after declaration of war, which meant if we would have had faster communication, this war might not have even been fought. July of 1812. Things were kind of getting odd here on Mackinac Island. You see, the Native Americans had been acting kind of fishy. According to Lieutenant Porter Hanks, he said that he wasn't quite sure what was going on. He started to get a little worried. In fact, he got to the point where on July 15th of 1812, he asked a few of the higher-ups in the village to meet up at the fort. He asks Michael Dousman, he asks Ambrose Davenport, just a few of the dignitaries that were invited. And he says, we have to come up with a plan. So on the late night, well, early evening really, of July 16th of 1812, these men, Ambrose Davenport and Michael Dousman, were told to leave Mackinac Island. You see, they left, went straight through, and to the north, they actually had to go up to St. Joseph's Island. That's 40 miles north of here. They get about 10 miles off the coast of the island where they run into the British flotilla. This being at about 11 o'clock at night. Captain Charles Roberts meets with these two men and says, you guys are going to head back to Mackinac Island and warn the villagers down in the village. Which is exactly what they did. That morning they went house to house telling people, get into the distillery, get into one centralized location so they could stay alive. They were afraid that a Native American massacre would ensue. He even woke up a doctor by the name of Sylvester Day. He was the post surgeon of Fort Mackinac at the time. Man, he had no idea what was about to happen. Sylvester Day runs up to the fort. He gets to Fort Mackinac. He says, Porter Hanks, you've got to wake up. The 23-year-old lieutenant, interim commander of Fort Mackinac with 56 men under his command. The next thing you know, Lieutenant Porter Hanks wakes up, rushes into his clothes, looks out the north blockhouse to where we are right now. He is looking directly at us if we were here that morning of July 17th of 1812. He sees 46 British regulars along with about 300 Native American warriors and about another 300 to 400 French voyageurs with 2 cannons aimed right at Fort Mackinac. Now, inside Fort Mackinac, like I said, 56 men. Lieutenant Porter Hanks prepared these men as best they could and get ready to fight. But Ambrose Davenport and Michael Dousman carrying a flag of truce down into the plains by Fort Mackinac. Well,
Lieutenant Porter Hanks thought over the situation, and he decided that in order to save the village, save families downtown, that he would surrender Fort Mackinac without a fight. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, the white flag of truce flew over the ramparts of Fort Mackinac. And the first military engagement of the War of 1812 officially ended.